This portfolio, Le Tumulte Noir by Paul Colin, was created at a very interesting moment in cultural history. It was created at the moment when Paris was the center of the art world. It was created at the moment that Black Americans have reimagined this incredible city of lights.
Dr. Paul Gates, I am the owner and consignor of the collection.
My name is Richard Powell. I'm an art historian at Duke University and deeply interested in the art of the 1920s and 30s, the time period during which this incredible portfolio was created.
And a moment ago, Dr. Powell said, Black is beautiful. You know, in the mid-60s, Black is Beautiful became the anthem. And that was at a pivotal point in my life. In 1969, my brother came home from Yale University his freshman year with an afro, and my uncles did not receive it well. So he came to me as his older brother and asked me if I would start growing my hair longer. So I did, and it had concomitant problems for me in dental school because I was the only Black in the school, so they weren't sure what I was doing. Move forward to 1981, and I'm in New Orleans, and I go to the Dianson Gallery and looking at other galleries, and I come across this book for sale. And that combination of representation of Black culture and what history I knew about Josephine Baker, particularly from discourse with my brother who had interviewed her while he was studying abroad. And I thought that long term, perhaps there might be some value in this.
You were so lucky to get this when you got it, because I know that these are very rare works of art and that the interest in Paul Colin has only grown over the years. So you just saw it and decided you wanted it.
Yeah, I would like to say I researched it, anticipated, and looked for it for years, but I was just walking down the street and saw an attractive sales lady in the art gallery, and the rest was history.
But you know, that's an important message to share with wannabe collectors, that number one, when you see it, you get it. Too often collectors say, oh, I'm gonna think about this, or I'm gonna like study this, and when you come back, it's gone, you know. The title of the portfolio, Le Tumulte Noir, translates into the Black uproar. And that's what it was, this incredible explosion of artistry. There are entertainers like Josephine Baker, there are intellectuals there as well, and all sorts of personalities from all parts of America who have gravitated to Paris to be a part of this incredible experiment. And so this is not only a beautiful portfolio, it's history. This colophon is what it's called in portfolio language. A colophon is a text that accompanies a group of prints. And this one is entitled The Topic of the Day, and it's written by Josephine Baker. So she's represented in the portfolio image-wise, but she's also represented in terms of her words. You know, to me, that's really, really important because it says that this is not just a beauty, this is not just a body, but this is a mind. What's also really interesting is that people really don't know her story. I mean, this is someone from St. Louis who basically was an orphan, who had no education. The education she had was the education of the streets, you know, the education of vaudeville, the education of performing on the stage. And she works her way from St. Louis, they all go to Chicago, and then they end up in New York City.
Where were you born?
I was born. Paul is teasing with me because he knows I'm a champion of Chicago. but it's also because in the Midwest you have this kind of root culture, this culture of the blues, this culture of industrial life, this tough life, you know. And but New York is the center of the entertainment world. So so many of these entertainers gravitate to New York City. And Baker, again, she was living by her wits. She was not particularly a singer. She wasn't even particularly a dancer at this point. She was really, she was a presence. She was a personality. And she's on the chorus line of all of these shows. And there's this show that gets created in 1925 called La Revue Nègre. And it's a show, a typical show from that era with singers and dancers and comedians. And again, she's a part of the chorus line. But she is so much of a character. She is so much of somebody who sticks out that she has an opportunity to be pulled aside. And they give her this routine where she's dancing opposite this guy from Martinique. And she's almost nude in this routine. And she's laying on, they're doing these acrobats where she's laying on his back and they're twirling and twisting. And the French had never seen anything like that before. And here is this 18-year-old girl who's doing amazing things with her body and making her face do all sorts of crazy things. She immediately grabbed the French imagination. And so this is 1927, this portfolio, and so she comes in 1925. By 1927, she is a star. She has been photographed, she has been painted, she has been dressed in the greatest Parisian fashions. I mean, the story is just kind of, it's just remarkable that someone from such a humble background could transform into this larger than life figure. So Paul Colin is picking up on that vibe. And it's no surprise that when he does this portfolio to explore this black uproar, this excitement of the jazz age in Paris, that the person who represents that more than anything, Josephine Baker, he gives an opportunity to tell her story. The other interesting thing about Josephine Baker is that she arrives in Paris at a moment when the French art world is fascinated with African art. They're intrigued with African sculptures. And when they see her dancing at the Champs-Élysées or you know, these other places, they say this is African sculpture in motion. This is what we're looking at when we go to the museums. But here it is moving and bending and twisting and turning. On one hand, there is adoration of black culture, but there's also a lot of stereotyping going on about black culture. The French, because of their background, they were colonists in many parts of West Africa and Central Africa, as well as in the Caribbean and also in Asia. And so they had really kind of, I'll just put it, some warped views around black culture. And so when we look at the portfolio, we have images that are on one hand quite celebratory of her and show her really almost as an icon of beauty. But then there are other images which, you know, very much play on certain stereotypes. And many black intellectuals were quite angry at the French for, you know, their almost blind sense of entitlement as related to peoples of African descent. So it's a complicated story, but a story that has to be told. So the story goes that in that first performance in 25, she's on the back of Joe Alex, and the French go crazy. A year after that, she performs with the Bananas, and then that's it. After that, you know, there's no stopping her. What's also great about Baker, and I always like to remind people this, is that thanks to the French, we have her on film from that period. And I always like to remind my students that fortuitously went to Paris because there were opportunities in Paris she could have never had in the United States, no matter how beautiful, no matter how talented. In fact, I think I've read where in the 30s she comes briefly to New York to perform at the Ziegfeld Follies, and it's a failure. And it's a failure primarily because Americans are just not accustomed or not used to or not comfortable with seeing beautiful, elegantly dressed, black women performing. In contrast, in Paris, she's given great Paris fashions to wear. She's in conversation with film people, and there are a whole set of really interesting films that were done in the 30s that show that she could master French eventually, that she could act, that she could dance, that she could even sing. So she's really, again, it's an incredible story of being self-made, but also being very savvy about one's opportunities and taking advantage of them.
Yeah, that always struck me, the ultimate success, even internationally, that she had, but certainly within the country of France, the level of importance she rose to socially.
And even after her glory years of the 20s and 30s, she was an icon. As you may know, she's buried in the Pantheon.
And my brother was working as a stringer in the summer during his studies on a Mellon Foundation scholarship at Cambridge. And he arranged to have a meeting with Josephine Baker and James Baldwin. And they certainly visited with Josephine, Miss Baker, more than one time. And Josephine told my former sister-in-law that she had never posed naked or danced naked. She always had a bodysuit. When my sister-in-law saw these pictures and some postcards that I had collected, we both agreed that history dims recall sometimes.
So the other incredible part of this portfolio is not just that Josephine Baker is central to it, but the artist is a really, really important artist. His name is Paul Colin. He was a poster artist, a designer, and he did theater design as well as graphics for various productions and what have you. He was very much a man of his era in the sense of the leading art form of that era in Paris was Cubism and Surrealism and the School of Paris. And so what's interesting about the portfolio is that he integrates these modern art designs and ideas into his depictions of the characters who were part of the entertainment world during that time period. So on one hand, the portfolio was documentary. It tells us the story of various entertainers, including Josephine Baker. But visually, it reflects the esprit de corps of modern painting during that time, Cubism, the exaggeration of body forms, the geometric elements that we find in Picasso or Braque, we see in this portfolio as well. There's such a great and important tradition of graphic design, particularly poster design in France. And he is at the top of the apex of important poster makers during that time period. Before my life as an art historian, I did an MFA in printmaking, which is why I'm so intrigued with this portfolio on multiple levels. The processes that Paul Colin and his group of printers were involved in making this portfolio is just unbelievable. It's lithography with pochoir, which is a stencil technique that allows you to hand apply colors. But when people see this portfolio, they'll realize this is happening on both sides of the paper. I mean, again, it's truly an incredible work of art and an historical document. It's also important to remember about this portfolio that with all of the amazing pictures of jazz age performers and Josephine Baker and Black Americans who have made the Le Tumulte Noir a reality, it's also a portfolio that shows other entertainers in France in those years. It has images of Maurice Chevalier. It has images of other people who performed in the cabarets and various establishments in Paris in those years. So it is a time capsule of a moment in time. And there's really nothing like it.
I am struck by his ability to translate what he sees onto the page and leave you with that feeling emotion. I fell in love with this. I've slept on this. I've kept it under my bed. I've several times played with the idea of the framing. I was very pleased when the photographic essay came out, since it was my brother. But I think I've had it long enough.